Hello everyone, good afternoon and welcome to ISET's Accreditation Assistance Webinar. My name is Alexa, ISET's Accreditation and Training Coordinator, and I'm pleased to be your host for today. Please note that this webinar is being recorded. Before I pass on the presentation to our presenters, I'd like to take you through some key features of our Zoom platform in order to help you make the most of your experience today. The Zoom webinar control bar is located at the bottom of your screen. You can use the different buttons to control your Zoom webinar experience. On the far left, you will find a button to control your audio settings. If you need to adjust how you are listening to the webinar, click the caret pointing up to expand the menu and change your listening options. The second button from the left will open the chat box. Here you can interact with other attendees, staff, and even the presenter. If you just want to communicate with the panelists, the presenter, or staff, change the recipient to all panelists. Chatting with all panelists and attendees will display your name. Feel free to give it a try, open up the chat box, and say hi to everyone. The middle button allows you to raise your hand. During the Q&A, you can raise your hand and we can unmute you so you can ask your question verbally. We might also use hand raising for a quick straw poll. Go ahead and give it a try and raise your hand now. And I'm seeing those messages pouring in the chat. I'm seeing people's hands being raised. It looks great. Thank you all. During the webinar, feel free to use the Q&A module to ask your questions. At the end of the presentation, we will moderate the questions and ask them verbally to the presenters. Keep in mind, if you don't get an answer to yours right away, we have not forgotten you. We are just saving it until the end. To send in your question, type it into the chat box and hit the send button. Other attendees will be able to see your question, so if you want to protect your identity, be sure to click the Send Anonymously checkbox. If the host or panelist answer your question via the Q&A box, it will appear below the question. Remember, sometimes questions are saved for the end of the presentation. Finally, if you need to leave the webinar, just use the Leave button to quit. So now that you're prepared to engage, I'd like to take the time to introduce your presenters for the session. On the line with us today are Dr. Karen LaMarche, ISET's Director of Accreditation and Training, and Lori Schneider, one of ISET's lead reviewer commissioners. As a staunch advocate for quality continuing and professional education, Karen LaMarche is passionate about her role as ISET's Director of Accreditation and Training. Previously, she served as chair of the ISET Commission and has facilitated national workshops to help applicants establish quality practices. She earned an engineering degree from Georgia Tech and not only a master's but also a doctorate in adult education from the University of Georgia. She has held several esteemed positions in universities, boards, and committees, and has consulted with entities to help them offer quality education programs. Lori Schneider is a seasoned talent development professional with experience building programs that meet business objectives. That is, growing leaders, improving performance, and increasing engagement, all built on best-in-class structure. She helped her organization create a corporate university which first achieved ISET accreditation back in 2009. She has over 18 years of experience in corporate, higher education, nonprofit, and research. Not to mention, she is an ISET commissioner and lead reviewer as well. So now that we have all the administrative information out of the way, let's get into the point of why you are here and learn about the process to becoming an ISET accredited provider. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you, Alexa. And we are so glad that all of you are here today. Thank you very much for your attendance and for your attention. As part of ISET's mission to improve the quality of continuing education and training worldwide through accreditation, we bring you this webinar each month as an opportunity for you to gain an understanding of the application process, as well as to allow you the opportunity to ask a commissioner some of your questions. This webinar supports the ISET mission in providing you with the information you need to make a decision about accreditation with ISET. When an organization becomes an accredited ISET CEU provider, they also get one more thing, a competitive edge. With IACET Continuing Education and Training Accreditation, you can tell the world your company is committed to best practices in adult learning and professional training, and that it has successfully mastered IACET's rigorous accreditation process. IACET offers workshops, webinars, downloadable and printed resources, industry research, and more to organizations pursuing training, reaccreditation, continuing education benchmarking, and process improvement. We guide learners to accredited providers. Our continuing education and training connection newsletter and other resources provide the general public and accrediting bodies with continuing education and training information. We want to foster a greater understanding of the ANSI IACET standard. By the end of this webinar, you will be able to identify the steps of the AP application process, as we will walk you through all the steps involved in accreditation. You'll be able to list the document requirement types for the initial and renewal application. We'll give you a description and a couple of examples of each type of document. You'll be able to identify the location of additional resources available to applicants. We'll show you where you can find more information on the IACET website. You'll be able to plan for next steps in the application process. We encourage you to take a moment at the end of this webinar to jot down next steps for you and your organization. To be clear, these learning outcomes are provided to also exemplify that any learning event should have learning outcomes that are compliant with the IACET standard and that they are SMART: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, relevant, and time-bound. Now let's take a moment to look at the fees. The standard and application are bundled together, and those are available on the website for $495. The application fee and annual membership fee for the initial application is due upon submission of your application in the online portal. The initial application fee is $4,290. The fee for the reapplication is reduced to $3,275. The annual membership is $1,095. If you would like your application expedited, you can elect to pay an additional $1,650. The application fees include the staff review, the initial and subsequent reviews by 2 IACET commissioners. If a third review is required, there is an additional fee of $450. We'll talk about that third review as we progress in the webinar. There are 9 categories within the application, and each category has at least one element associated with it. For each element, you'll find guidance given in the application to help you understand what you must submit. It's advisable to read through the entire application and the embedded guidance to have a clear picture of how it's organized before you begin to upload your documents. In just a few minutes, we'll review the standard categories. Upon submitting the application is reviewed by staff for completeness. This will not be counted as one of your commissioner reviews and will not count against you. We will make every effort to have this initial preview complete in 2 to 3 business days. Once the application passes the staff review, 2 commissioners, a lead reviewer, and a site visitor are assigned. Each commissioner reviews the application independently. The commissioners will consult with each other throughout the entire process. After the initial application review, usually about 4 weeks, the commission will either approve for a site visit or do another review, which is common. Keep in mind that 95% of the applications are sent back after the commission's initial review. If the first 2 reviews do not answer the commission's questions, the third and final review will take place and requires an additional fee of $450. So let's look at these step by step. Step 1, you submit your application. Your application will be with our staff for the preview, an initial review. We will make every effort to have this done within 2 business days. The application will either be returned to you for additional information or it will get sent to the commission for review. Step 3, once the application goes to the commission, there is a 15 business day turnaround. It will be sent back to you or scheduled for a site visit. During this phase, there is also an optional phone call that can be requested by you or the commissioners. Please don't forget about that. Before you resubmit the application to the commissioners, you may request to talk with them about anything in which you need further clarification. Step 4, most likely the application will be sent back to you in step 3. If that happens, then in step 4, you will have an opportunity to revise and amend the application, add some additional information before the second submission to the commissioners. This second submission review will take less time. Typically, the second review will result in you being approved for the site visit. This frame shows those 2 review cycles. Step 5. During this step, the site visit is scheduled, conducted, and turned into a report based on results of the site visit. Once you have been approved for the site visit, the commissioner, who will be conducting it, will reach out to you to schedule the visit. They will work with you regarding the timing. Site visits typically take 4 to 6 hours to conduct. During the site visit, the commissioner will clarify that all the information in an organization's application is accurate. The site visitor may ask questions about specific items on the application and may ask an organization to confirm responses with evidence. Everything that is required by the site visit will be given to you prior to the site visit. No surprises. So here's an overview of all that we have just covered. And so you'll know all the timelines can be flexible. So if you find that you need more time to reply, please contact our offices and let us know. We would much rather you submit an application of quality than to rush through it to meet the deadline. Now, what to expect during the site visit? When IACET notifies you that your organization has been approved, the site visiting commissioner will contact you to set a specific date and time. The visit will be conducted in 1 day by the site visitor. The visit is designed to be as non-intrusive as possible and should not involve more than a few people within your organization. Before the site visit, you should make sure all materials as requested in the accredited provider application are readily available for the site visitor. Because we are conducting virtual site visits, you will be emailed a link to a SharePoint folder that will provide you a place to upload the materials for the site visit. During the site visit, you and the site visitor should get acquainted. You should provide the site visitor with an overview of your organization, its purpose, and your role in continuing education and training. The site visitor will discuss the twofold purpose of the visit: to validate the accuracy of information provided in your application, and to share with you the role and responsibilities of an accredited provider. The site visitor will review with you questions on your application and ask you to verify with evidence your response to the questions. The site visitor may ask you to provide additional examples of materials that demonstrate how you're meeting the standard. These examples may already be included in the materials you have gathered for the site visitor. Keep in mind, the site visitor is attempting to ascertain whether your organization is following the ANSI IACET standard. The site visitor has been trained to gather evidence to support your adherence to the standard. However, the site visitor will not act as a consultant for your company. The site visitor is prohibited from receiving any gifts or services or from any further consulting with your organization. It is entirely appropriate for the site visitor to meet and talk with others in your organization. Such contacts and meetings should be brief and informal to allow the site visitor to complete their assignments. Upon conclusion of the visit, the site visitor meets with the organization's representative, that is, the same person the visitor started with at the beginning of the visit. The site visitor may offer general impressions and comments about factual matters, but cannot offer interpretations and opinions about the final decision of the commissioners. The site visitor must complete a report of his or her findings and forward it to the lead reviewing commissioner, who completes the final report. The report is then sent to you regarding the decision of the commissioners. If you have any questions about what to expect during the virtual site visit that are not answered here, you may contact our offices at 703-763-0705. And I just want to reiterate that all of our virtual site visits are being conducted on the Zoom platform, much like we're doing the webinar today. And we do have our cameras on, and it's just a very face-to-face conversation that we have with you during our site visits. The IASSET standard consists of 9 categories. IASSET does not prescribe how you should operate your learning organization. However, we ask that you consider and address these categories to ensure that you consider and address these categories to ensure that you are offering high-quality learning events. Let's take a closer look at the 2018 standard categories. The ovals illustrate the instructional design process. These are the categories in the standard that look at how learning events are developed, beginning with needs analysis, following through with development of learning outcomes, content and instruction, assessment, and then evaluation. The boxes across the bottom of the design model show categories 1, 2, 3, and 8 as the administrative side of the IASSET standard. The standard categories, as illustrated in the model, provide organizations with a framework to adhere to quality continuing education and training practices. Adherence to the standard provides a systematic approach to identifying and analyzing learning needs. The ANSI IASSET standard helps continuing education and training providers establish an appropriate responsibility and control system, encourage an analytical approach to identifying and analyzing learning needs, design, plan, and execute a quality learning event, establish appropriate assessment criteria based on the learning outcomes, monitor and improve the learning process in order to achieve its objectives. And the ANSI IASSET standard also emphasizes the importance of continually reviewing and improving education and training to ensure the development of quality programs that meet consumer needs. Here is one of the key takeaways from today's webinar. Reviewers need to see what the actual audience sees. So there's some documentation that you will provide that is employer, contractor, instructor-facing documentation and evidence. And then there's some that is learner-facing documentation and evidence. And so many times we ask for evidence that is seen specifically by the learners. It may be posted on your website. It may be marketing materials that are sent out to your audience. We want to see specifically what they see, exactly what they see. And then there's some information that your employees or your instructors or your instructional designers see. We want to see exactly what they see. So maybe out of a standard operating procedure or an employee manual or something like that, we want to see exactly what they see. That's the kind of evidence that we're looking for, something that's established. So Lori, we're glad that you're here with us today, and thank you for spending some time with us and explaining policies, processes, and evidence. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. I'm going to read some information from a blog article published in IASSET CET Connection publication. It says, Policies provide important communications to internal and external stakeholders, such as instructors, administrators, and learners, on the expectations of participating with the organization in a learning experience. Policies are documents that provide an organization with the primary principles and tenets for how it conducts its business, how employees should conduct themselves, and what customers can expect. Policies that guide an accredited provider's learning events are an essential piece of evidence in the accreditation process. Let's examine the critical elements in a policy and what the reviewing commissioners or reviewers will expect to see in an application for accreditation. For simplicity, it may be useful to organize policies into a single policy manual for distribution to appropriate stakeholders. You'll find that using a template when writing policies will be helpful in keeping the documentation uniform across the application. Policies should be written into the fabric of the organization and not just written for this application. Dates of adoption or revision should be included. So the policy should be current, and the form should capture the dates for any changes to the policy. The reviewers need to see that a policy has been in place for at least 3 months before the application was submitted. An organization should also look at particularly old policies and see if revisions are needed. Looking at the approval or owners. For a policy to carry weight, identify its responsible party on the document. The commissioners reviewing your application will want to see that your organization has identified the person or role responsible for the policy and who enforces it. A good policy will also designate the policy owner if it's different than the approver. For policies to be implemented throughout the organization, all policies should have and maintain high-level leadership buy-in and approval. The policy should include a description. What is the business need for this policy? The description is a narrative that describes the policy and the need for it, the why. The description is not the actual policy, but instead introduces the policy and why it exists in the first place. The description can show the relationship between the policy and the broader organizational mission. The policy provides your organization parameters around how to achieve its mission. In other words, what is the policy trying to accomplish? For example, a policy for hiring qualified personnel, such as in category 3.1a, this is required by the standard. Your policy should include standards and definitions. The core of any policy is articulated by the standards of behavior or service that the policy is describing and enforcing. The goal of the policy is to create uniformity within the organization and is written to guide how employees or contractors are to act. Policies also let customers, clients, and learners know what they can expect from your organization when they attend your learning events. It should also include consequences of non-compliance. The implications of non-compliance are an essential piece to the policy. It's a good practice for policies to include the details for reporting any violations and the consequences of the breach. And as mentioned earlier, who is responsible for enforcement? Length. The policy does not need to be large, overly detailed document. Instead, usually shorter is often better as there's less room for interpretation. However, it's essential to keep in mind that the policy is not the process required to implement. There are several elements that require policies. In the ANSI ISET 2018 standard, categories and elements 1.6a, 1.7a, 1.8a, 3.1a, 6.2a, and 8.6a require policies. The majority of these elements also require supporting evidence that documents and demonstrates how the policies are transmitted to those who are responsible for implementation and adherence. The commissioners also want to see documentation that shows that the learners are informed of the organization's policies that affect their experience with the learning event. For simplicity, it may be useful to organize policies into a single policy manual for distribution to the appropriate stakeholders. You will find using a template when writing these policies are helpful. I know I've repeated this, but it's really important that the policies live in your organization, they benefit your organization and are not just for the application. That's why it's important to have a policy manual that you use. IACET requires you to submit documented processes as an essential part of accreditation to the ANSI IACET standard for continuing education and training. Accreditation to the standard confirms that your organization can consistently design, develop, and deliver high-quality training regardless of changes within your organization. When reviewing the application for accreditation, the commissioner or reviewer will expect your process documents to include introduction or an overview, the process objectives, description of the process, why is it needed, and when is it performed. Also should include the responsible parties. This is the position assigned to the task, and that position should appear on the organizational chart. Also, inputs and outputs. What is needed, such as data and information, to be able to perform the steps, and what reports, checklists, or other documentation is produced as a result of following the procedures. The procedures, the sequence of activities that make up the process. Basically the step-by-step instructions provided to an employee to complete the process, and the tools that are used to complete the process. These tools can be checklists, templates, other forms that are used to follow the procedures. When submitting the application for accreditation, these tools will be completed and also submitted as evidence. Many organizations represent processes in flowcharts. While a flowchart can be a useful part of the document, the process document, for most organizations, it does not contain the level of detail needed by the reviewing commissioners. The flowchart can be a useful overview of the process, but rarely can a flowchart contain the required level of detail alone. It would not be best practice to submit only a flowchart to show the documented process for the application to accreditation standard. The flowchart can be the overview and provide the necessary steps or boxes and to detail in a more narrative style of document. For IACET accreditation, the process document must contain the procedural level of detail. By documenting the processes in the manner required by the IACET accreditation, the organization is safeguarding its expertise in instructional design and delivery. Here is an example of a documented process. Some important considerations regarding the processes implemented as a result of the accreditation process. All processes must be in place for a minimum of 3 months before submitting the application. For every process that requires evidence in the application, provide evidence from an actual learning event tied to an actual learner. Names and personal information can be redacted if needed. The IACET required process document is more in-depth and contains greater detail than commonly used in processes required for other certifications or accrediting bodies. The Oxford Dictionary states that a process is a series of actions taken to achieve a particular end, while ISO defines a process as a set of interrelated or interacting activities that transforms inputs into outputs. In many industries, the process document does not detail the step-by-step procedures or give the work instructions that are needed to achieve consistent results. The process should provide the following: who, what, when, how, and with what tools. These are the standard elements in which you are expected to provide documented processes. So you can see that there's a lot more than there were with the policies. Now let's talk about evidence. Let me give you a definition of evidence. Evidence shows that policies and processes shared as part of the review process are carried out regularly. And to be able to do this, the evidence must be submitted. The evidence submitted must be actual evidence that was produced during or as a result of the following the policies and processes as described. If forms are used to implement a process, those completed forms would be evidence and they must be included. Evidence should show that the policies and processes presented in the application are in practice and have been so for at least a minimum of 3 months. When including evidence for review, it is oftentimes helpful to highlight or otherwise draw attention to the specific piece that the reviewers will need to review for that element. Here are some standard elements that require evidence of the documented policies and processes. Now let's do a poll. For many of the elements in the application, you must have A, the policy or process, B, proof that you follow the policy or process, C, video of staff following the process, A and B, or B and C.
And participants, this is Alexa. I'm about to launch a live poll on the screen, so you can actually go ahead and select which response you feel best represents the answer to the question. And then in just a few seconds, maybe about 5 more seconds, we will go ahead and close the poll and share those results. I'm seeing the percentage of participants increasing. Thank you so much. We'll give you about 3 more seconds. All right, Lori, we've got our responses. Let's go ahead and end this poll and share the results.
Oh, A and B, you guys are 100% correct. Good. Yeah, that's exactly right. For many of the elements, you will need both the policy or process and proof or evidence. Let's talk about exemplary courses or learning events. So courses is interchangeable with learning events. ISET accreditation requires the provider to choose as many as 3 courses or learning events that will be used as evidence to support categories 4 through 7. This course will be the basis for additional evidence throughout the application. Throughout the ISET application, you will see the term learning event. It's a term used to incorporate the wide range of course types that can be implemented, and we use those terms synonymously. An exemplary course should be chosen from each methodology used and should have a clear and unambiguous structure. To save time, choose courses for which the provider has already developed documentation. The courses used as evidence should be representative of all delivery methods used by the application's organization. The application could include up to 3 exemplary courses if all delivery methods are used by the organization. Applicants will be expected to choose 1 exemplary course for each delivery method, and these examples should remain consistent. Keep in mind that you'll need to present a course design document for at least 2 learning events. During the site visit, the ISET Commissioner will request documentation and evidence for 3 courses for which the procedures for compliance are being followed. Exemplary courses and delivery methods. ISET classifies delivery methodology into 3 categories: synchronous, asynchronous, and hybrid or blended, which is a combination of the previous 2. Choose exemplary courses that the application requires examples of the learning events from your organization. There should be 1 example from each method of delivery that you use to deliver your learning events. Use the same course or courses throughout the application. Now, in cases of the reaccreditation application, the accredited providers must go through the reaccreditation process at the end of a 5-year cycle meaning your accreditation is effective for 5 years. This process has recently changed and been streamlined and simplified. Much of what will be submitted in the reaccreditation process, in the reaccreditation application, are narratives. During reaccreditation, you will be expected to report any organizational changes within the last 5 years, such as staff changes, mergers or acquisitions, ownership, delivery methods, etc. The site visit is still required with the reaccreditation application. Let me give you some tips for completing the application. Ensure that all policies, processes, and evidence are written in clear, concise, and simple language. Written so that what needs to be done can be easily followed by all reviewers. And describe who is responsible for doing what. Present a consistent, logical framework for action. You also want to ensure that the application is organized. Attachments or evidence must be inserted in the appropriate field of the online application. Highlight PDFs and select excerpts. Make it easy for your reviewer to find the information in your evidence. Do we have any questions? You can send them in via the Q&A panel.
All right, thank you so much, Lori. And yes, as she just said, if you have a question and you have not already submitted it, go ahead and head over to that Q&A panel on your toolbar, and you can submit it at any point in time for the rest of our time today. But just to get us started with one question, one person writes, "Our firm is a healthcare consulting firm. What we provide would be a variety of educational offerings. How would we provide evidence of the material presented when this is fluid in nature?"
Mm-hmm. So with any educational offering, there's something that you do at the very beginning in planning it out. Just for people to come, you're advertising to them, what are you going to cover in this educational offering? What will they get out of it? When should they show up? Things like that. So you're going to be providing them with some of that information. You need to take that a step further, for the back office, or, completing a design document or a series of documents that could be considered a design document. So certainly before somebody gets up in front of others, they have an outline. So you need to have an outline. There needs to be learning outcomes established. What is the learner going to do to demonstrate that they've mastered that topic or the lessons that you're provided? A needs analysis. Why are we doing this education in the first place? And what problem are we trying to solve? And where did we get that information to even identify that problem? And there's more. So each of these things are thought out and documented before you step into an educational event. And it can be fluid in the way that you present it and the things that you guys discuss in some ways, but you need to have a goal and you need to have a target before you step into that educational offering. There are times where we might have, in organizations that I've worked, we have our courses in which we offer CEUs. Perhaps you have courses that you don't offer CEUs for because they don't have learning outcomes. They're not established. So that may be something, or sometimes we would have vendors come in and just display their product, and we don't control what the vendor provides. And so it's not really a course. It's more of just kind of a discussion or a presentation. And so those things wouldn't really qualify. That's not what we're talking about for a learning event. A learning event is something that's well planned out in advance. Carla, does that answer your question?
All right, and while Carla, if she decides to send a response just to affirm that, another question we have, somebody is asking if we can please review the policy definition page. So I've briefly set it up so I can jump back there real quick. Karen or Lori, if you don't mind, would you be able to review that slide again?
Mm-hmm.
Alexa, I just want to go back and just build on what Lori talked about there too. just want to make sure that I remind everybody that we accredit organizations. We don't accredit individual courses, we accredit organizations. And like Lori said, when we accredit organizations, we're accrediting their processes, their instructional design processes, and the way that they set up their courses and things like that, especially in instructional design, and the way that they develop and assess their courses and then evaluate and then move into continuous improvement. We don't really accredit courses, individual courses. And so some of the courses that they offer, they may, like Lori said, they may award and offer ISET CEUs, and some of them they may not. But we really, truly only accredit the organizations and not individual courses. So definitely want to make that distinction. And then if you could repeat your other question, because I was thinking a little bit more about that. So,
Well, actually, she just responded and she says, yes. So for evidence, we would need to provide documentation of courses we have developed. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then someone else has written in asking to please review the policy definition page or slide.
Can you?
Sure. Policies, they're documents that provide an organization with the primary principles and tenets for how it conducts business, how their employees should conduct themselves, and what the customers can expect. Policies that guide an accredited provider's learning events are essential pieces of evidence in the accreditation process. So it's a written statement, and we went over the different things that a policy needs to contain. So that's a good list. As you take a look at your policies, it's a good list to see, does my policy have these things? Does it have, a description? Has it been approved by somebody, especially a high ranking person in the organization? One of the things when I went through my first initial accreditation with my first organization that I was with, one of the things that we found is there were a couple policies that we just didn't even have. And so it took me some time to really work with senior leaders at my firm and identify and develop a policy that's going to work for us and get it adopted, get it communicated out to the organization so people know, hey, this is a new policy that we're having, that we're going to be implementing, and putting it into our policy manual. And then of course, we need that 3-month period of actually implementing that policy and using it as an organization before we could apply. So that was something that took me a little bit longer. The first, the very first go around of accreditation for that one organization took a little bit longer to work on the application because, we were missing a couple policies, and then also making sure that the policies you do have are up to date and really work for the business, but then also work for the application. The application is best practices. So making sure that, it adheres to best practices.
Somebody else had asked about a policy template, and we really don't provide that. But if you go on Google and you just put in policy templates, all kinds of different policy templates will pop up, and you can find the template that works best for your organization. And sometimes if you're a department within a larger organization, there's already a policy template that your organization is using. And if a policy has already been established by your larger organization, you don't have to start from scratch and create another policy. You can use the same policy, like an anti-discrimination policy that has already been established for your organization. You can use that same exact anti-discrimination or intellectual proprietary interest or something like that. If that's already been established for your larger organization, you can use that. Or if they have a policy template that you can use for your department, go ahead and use that template. We just want to see some consistent policy forms that address the different issues that we talk about. And that slide, somebody was asking about the slide where we say 1.6, 1.7, 1.8, where we set all the different slides. The document that we were talking about is the application and the standard. the standard asks about, do you have, it said that if you want, you know, quality continuing education and training, the standard requires that an organization have a documented policy for anti-discrimination, for intellectual property rights, for, you know, so there are places in the application. And that particular slide was talking about the various places in the standard and thus in the application where you need to have a policy. And so that's what that slide was talking about.
Great, thank you both so much. And then just a quick point of clarification. Someone was wondering what document was being referenced in the presentation with 1.6a, 1.7a. Is it the application packet, they ask?
Yes.
What?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was just talking about, the standard elements. It was talking about the standard elements. In the standard refers to these particular within the category 1.6, in category 1, and in the element 1.6a, that particular element requires a policy. So in the application, that element within category 1, 1.6a, requires a policy. So it corresponds in the standard to the application. That's where you're going to have to put a policy and submit whatever your policy is for that particular element.
Is there an example of a properly completed application and or deliverables that can be used as support when applying?
No, and I think Lori addressed this in part of her presentation, where we do not prescribe how you need to do your business. IASET will never tell you how you need to run your organization. What we do say is, here is the standard for quality continuing education and training. And here are, within each of these categories and within each of these elements, here are the things that you need to address to have quality continuing education and training. So you need to make sure you have the best personnel that you can, the most qualified personnel that you can in your design, in the delivering the training, all of these kind of things. Make sure that you validate that the person taking the training is the person who registered for the training, is the person who you are awarding the CEUs to, those kind of things. We want to make sure that you have all of these policies, processes, and that you have evidence to support these policies and processes. That's what the application is all about. That's what we're going to ask you about. What is your policy for this? What is your documented process for this? And as Lori told you, it's very detailed, so that if somebody else has to step in and do this process, they're going to be able to step by step go through and perform this process. And then here's the evidence of what your of somebody who's actually followed this process. Here's what they were able to produce by fulfilling this process. And so we're looking for all of those things. So it's a lot of detail. It's a lot of work. But I tell you, if you're able to answer these questions, you're telling us that you're able to address all of these issues. And we're not judging whether it's a good process, or what we're looking for is, do you have all of the components? Are you able to tell us how you're doing it? And then does the evidence support how you told us you were going to be able to do it? And when you tell us these are the tools, did you use the tools that you told us that you were going to do, that you were going to be able to use? So that's what we're looking for. But we're not going to tell you how to do it. We just want to see, are you doing these things?
Someone else asks, do we have access to the standard prior to purchasing the application?
Not at this time. Right now it's sold as a bundle. The standard and the application are sold together. But I can tell you there's talk in the future about possibly separating the two. And allowing you to purchase the standard without purchasing the application. That's been we've been asked about that before, and there's some discussion about that. So I do want to back up a minute. If you want examples, I can, they're under the resources. Once you purchase the standard and the application, you do have access to some resources. There are some white papers. There are a couple of templates. There are some like design documents and Bloom's taxonomy and how to write learning outcomes and things like that. You get access to some tools and some templates and things like that. But I can tell you some of the best resources are the workshops, the accreditation workshops. If you come to a workshop, we've got some 1-day workshops and some 2-day workshops for the intro to IASET accreditation, where you're going to be able to dig deep into each of the categories, into each of the elements. And Jim Cook is teaching those workshops now and just does a wonderful job with those, as far as talking about what are we looking for in each one of those categories and each one of those elements, and what is a good policy here. And you can ask him specific questions about, here's what our policy looks like. Here's what our process looks like. Do we have enough information here? All of those kind of things. So, and we have those just about every month. So please check those out under our events tab, where you can go in and really walk away with feeling a lot more comfortable. We're getting a lot of great feedback from those workshops where people walk out and they understand exactly what we're talking about. They become very familiar with the language, and they come away a lot more confident being able to fill out the application and understand what we're looking for and the depth of detail that they're looking for. I think somebody asked a little bit more about the reaccreditation process. Lori told you that it was a little more streamlined. It is more of a narrative process. What we're doing is validating that everything that you told us in the initial process is being followed through still 5 years later. Basically, you're telling us, has your personnel changed? Have you merged? Have you been acquired by somebody? You're telling us if there's anything that has changed in your business, if the organization has changed, if the mode of delivery has changed in any way, if you've taken on maybe a new area of training, anything like that. But then we're also going to say, okay, provide us documentation from 3 of your courses. We're still going to ask for that because we still need to see how you're running your courses. But it's a lot more narrative provided. And of course, we're still going to be looking at your annual reports and have you been submitting those? And we'll go back and look at those to make sure that somebody's been monitoring every year and doing an annual review of your organization.
And then tagging along with that for our last question for today, do our previously approved policies need to be included in the reaccreditation application?
I don't
believe so.
Yeah, I don't believe so. Anywhere do we ask that you provide any of your policies. We do believe that you have to be following them. And I will tell you, one of the biggest things, and I think Lori will agree with this, one of the biggest things that we see is because IASET, we have to be accredited every 5 years. Sometimes what happens is you get accredited under the 2018, maybe you get accredited in 2020, but we have to go under accreditation in 2023, where your accreditation isn't going to be until 2025. Well, what happened in 2023 is the standard may have changed just a little bit, not a lot, but it may have changed a little bit. You are responsible for keeping up with what changes were made from 23 to 25. So you have to make sure that you're keeping up with, and we send out notifications and we send out information to make sure that you keep up with all of that. So that you know that when you come up for reaccreditation in 2025, you know what changes have been made. So it is your responsibility to make sure that you're keeping up with the standard and any changes. That would be the only thing when you come up for reaccreditation is making sure that you're keeping up with ISET. And that's why we say each year you need to go through your annual review also and make sure that you're still aligned with the current standard, the current ANSI ISET standard. So that's one thing I would add, that you need to make sure you keep up with that.
Well, thank you very much, Karen and Lori, for all of your insight and your assistance in answering all these questions. Participants, thank you so much for asking your questions. We just have a few last things to leave you with regarding resources as well as upcoming ISET events. So stay tuned. It is highly recommended that you utilize all resources when working on the ISET application. Once the standard and application bundle has been purchased, you will see that additional online resources become available to you through the Resources tab on the ISET website. There you can find several templates and guidance documents that will help you in writing processes, course design documents, learning outcomes, and many more. As some next steps, this webinar was designed to give you a general overview of the application process. As Karen mentioned, we always recommend that you attend an accreditation workshop to get a more in-depth look at the application and process. And as always, if you have any additional questions that were not answered in today's webinar, please feel free to contact our office. Our information will be on the last slide coming up here in just a bit. In terms of some upcoming events, in addition to accreditation assistance webinars, ISET is pleased to provide high-quality professional development webinars. Our next one is tomorrow on the virtual learner and knowledge transfer, presented by Rothwell and Associates. You can find out more information on our website or in upcoming newsletters for the rest of the year. As well, any organization currently seeking accreditation or reaccreditation, as well as any accredited organization who may have new employees not familiar with ISET, are encouraged to take advantage of one of our workshops. These are intensive, engaging learning experiences designed to guide you through the foundational concepts of the ISET standard and how you can apply them to your training operations. The Reaccreditation Readiness Workshop will focus on documentation for reaccreditation, and it's great for those who are already familiar with the 2018 standard and need to prepare for reaccreditation. Keep in mind though, if you are preparing for reaccreditation as an organization, but you yourself as an individual are not familiar with the standard, please register for one of our Introduction to ISET Accreditation workshops, and we will have a segment on reaccreditation embedded with that, but you will really develop a foundational understanding of what was needed to initially apply in the first place. As well, in an effort to support the highest quality continuing education and training, ISET offers a dynamic 2-day workshop on everything you need to know when training adults. This course covers adult learning theories, practical instructional design, and delivery strategies and techniques. If you are a new adult education trainer or subject matter expert assisting with instructional design, then this is the course for you. Please note that our next offering is on September 13th and 15th, so there is a day skipped in between. You can find out more information on our website. And lastly, if you'd like to join us again, our next Accreditation Assistance webinar will be on Wednesday, August 11th at 1 o'clock Eastern Time. You can always view a past recording of this webinar under the Events menu tab on our website and under the sub-tab Archived Webinars. So Events, Archived Webinars. Well, this concludes our webinar for today. Again, I'd like to thank Lori and Karen for being with us and for providing all that insight. And to everyone attending our webinar today, thank you for your involvement. We hope you found the information useful and that you're excited to begin or continue digging through your application. If you have any questions, our contact information is on the screen. Please don't hesitate to contact the office at any time. Thank you very much and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.